am very pleased today to be sitting here with my good friend Mark Palmer. Ever since I thought about what kind of things I would love for people to understand, for guys to understand going through divorce, Mark was one of the first guys who came to my mind that people need to hear his story, hear about the way he thinks, hear about the way he's gone through his life. So thanks, Mark, for sitting down with me today.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, great. Maybe just to set some context for folks, a little bit of background about just, the bare details. How long ago did you get divorced? How long were you married? What's your situation now?
Got divorced about 16 years ago, so it's been a while. I was married for a couple of years, and I've got a girlfriend now, fiance. Actually, probably get married again. We can talk about that in detail if you want to.
So it was such a long time ago for you, but the one thing that I think that everyone can relate to as sort of grounding moment is, do you remember where you were the moment that you realized you're getting divorced?
Well, I think back, it was a couple, it wasn't an exact moment, I would say. It was a process. Because I think for me, along the way, I thought things weren't working out very well. We were trying to work on that. At some point, little by little, I guess, come to a realization where you realize maybe it's not going to work. And for me, maybe it wasn't a given day. But there was certainly a point where I realized that had been the case, that it's already developed, and we needed to pull the trigger, so to speak, and say, okay, you know what, we're just on two different pages, we're never going to get on the same page, and we need to make that move forward, which is difficult for anybody to do. So yeah, I do remember where we had that conversation, what we did to get over that. And obviously that was a very difficult thing to do, to make that change.
What would you call the prevailing emotion? Were you sad? Were you upset? Were you angry?
Not by then. By that point, all of the feeling that all different senses you go through around, failure, perhaps shame, the questioning, did you put enough time into it, really asking yourself, am I failing personally? Did I put enough effort? Is this my fault? Where does that all lie? I think probably all those questions that you go through, even though maybe there's no answer to all of it, those were pretty much done by this point. And it was just sort of a take a deep breath and actually go through the process of separation and divorce. And by the time you get to this point, I started to see on the other side, I would say, glimpses of light at the end of the tunnel. I knew I was going to go through a process. It wasn't going to be easy. But given that this was not on a whim, that a lot of work had been done, a lot of effort had been put into it to try to make it work, because that was the intention. By this point, there was even little pieces of relief along the way, once you had the conversation, and once you had the definitive conversation, because you probably have many. I certainly did.
It's interesting because I don't hear any anger, and I think a lot of guys are angry when they're getting divorced. Is it because so much time has passed, you're no longer angry, or you just even then?
I think probably everybody gets over anger at some point. As to when they get over it, I think is very individual. Yeah. For me, I think I got lucky maybe. I was on the early side. I didn't have a lot of anger. I think at times, even through the process of divorce, realizing it wasn't working, separation and eventually divorce, I did, like everybody, at times want to blame my ex-wife for something or another, but I think in the back of my mind, I knew that it's not their fault.
Yeah.
That we're just not getting along well. Hey, I wanted to get married. I chose them as they chose me, and those turned out to be a choice that only lasted for us a couple of years and had an end date to it, and that's okay. So I think it was really nobody to blame but myself for setting myself to an expectation I wasn't meeting that caused any anger. And so it wasn't so much I forgave my ex-wife, not at all. There was nothing to forgive from that perspective. It was more or less me forgiving myself, I think, for setting expectations that everything had to follow the fairy tale path, that, you get married, you're never going to get divorced, this is forever. Yeah, that was the intention, but it didn't work out. So I think once I got through that at that point, the anger was not there.
Wow. It sounds like you've always had a really healthy mindset around analyzing yourself first and thinking primarily about what you could do, what you could have done, and in talking about yourself, when I talk to guys who are recently divorced, going through divorce, they can spend a lot of time, myself included, we can spend a lot of time just having thoughts, and a lot of times it'll come out of your mouth about the other person. Talk about what she didn't do. But, and it takes a while to come around to this perspective. You've got to understand yourself, and really the only way to move forward is to think about what you need to do. And it was hard for me to get there.
Yeah, and I think I went through all that too. So I may not only have the thinking now, but perhaps I reflect, some wisdom, perhaps a little bit. I think there's a lot of distance in time.
Yeah.
I'm sure at the time, in the back of my mind, yes, I was thinking this, but yeah, I was sitting down with friends, doing the same things, probably playing a little bit of the blame game.
Yeah.
And none of that was really true or helpful, although maybe it's just a part of the process we have to go through. I think if there is that little piece in the back of the mind that is reflecting in this way, maybe I went through it a little more quickly than I otherwise would have. Maybe it wasn't quite as painful for me to get through that, but sure, I sat around feeling like my dreams, realistic or not, were dashed on the shores, and so I think we all go through that.
Yeah. Let me jump way forward, all the way forward to now,
Okay.
and ask the big question, even though I think it's a little obvious. Are you happy now?
Yeah, very happy. In fact, if we're kind of talking about a part of the divorce process and all of that, I couldn't be happy from that perspective. So I'm lucky. I think got a great relationship with the ex-wife as well. It's challenging when you have a kid involved. A lot of people have kids, and that's worked out well for us. Not that we didn't have struggles all along the way, but that's worked out quite well. We couldn't be happier about that.
What can you tell guys about what's important when there's a kid involved? Now, of course, everyone's heard the advice. Well, don't blame, don't badmouth the spouse in front of the kids, that kind of thing. But it's still kind of hard. But what advice can you give when there are kids involved?
Maybe there's one word that I would use, and maybe this applies to every aspect of divorce in life, and that is patience. First, patience with yourself. That's been a challenge for me. Patience with your ex-wife. Patience with your children as well, from all those perspectives. I think we, around our children, have so much desires for things to be a certain way that when they're not that way, we get frustrated. If you're divorced, or even if you're married, you can easily blame the other spouse for not happening out this way. Is that really true? Is that really the case? No. So, being patient. Yes, there's a tendency for everybody to point fingers at the other one. I'm sure the finger been pointed at me too for certain things. But if you really care about your kids, yes, I think you're right. That advice probably is all very true. Always try to support the other spouse. That will come back to you in multiple ways. Will come back for everybody. Everybody's situation is different. And some people have had very difficult situations with their spouses where it's difficult to say, oh yeah, just do these 3 things and it'll go easy. You know what? Let's take a minute to respect the fact that I've known people that have had very difficult circumstances. Although they've tried to take the advice you've suggested just now, it just doesn't work. Nothing does. So nonetheless, whatever hand you're dealt, whoever you've been with as a spouse, I think it's still going to make your situation better if you can be patient like that. Support them in every way you can, even if you don't feel supported yourself. Just keep doing that. People tend to come around over time. It just may not be in our timeline.
That's tough. I'm working through that myself now, and trying to be supportive, trying to do the right thing. But it's hard when you don't feel like you're getting the return. And of course, when you're in a relationship that didn't work,
sure,
that's the nature of the relationship. Neither one of you is capable of giving or receiving well from the other. Was it like that for you, or really you were pretty good people to each other right from the get-go?
We had our challenges, not nearly as bad as a lot of people I've seen, friends I've had, and seen how they've experienced divorce. That being said, yeah, we had our challenges. Not being great at communicating around certain things. Someone asking the other person the right way to cover for a weekend or for a time with a child or something like that. Obviously, if you have children, you have this interaction. If you don't, and you don't have that around a child, So it's a highly emotional situation that you're dealing with in that sense. But yeah, no, we had our challenges. My approach, and it seemed to work in my case, was just to always say yes. I will be there to do anything required of it. After a while, how can someone not sit there and say, you know what, they're being a good co-parent?
Yeah.
If everything you're saying is yes, I'll be there, make it happen,
Yeah.
and support that way. And if both people have that attitude, that no matter what you feel about them, the kid is separate. If you feel that they did something else to you that wasn't great, who knows what, if you just act this way because you love your kids, I think you're on a better footing to actually do well with your children and actually be better co-parents down the road. Challenging as it is.
There's actually there's a great bit there that I want to dig out a little bit.
Okay.
If you can really help me with this. You talked about the right way to do a thing. Let me ask, what is the right way to ask for a rescheduling, a cover, or something like that? Because I have difficulty with that. Like, oh, I wanted to switch a day that we had, and I'm just so anxious. I'm a little afraid about the reaction and about payback. Like, so what's the right way to ask about that?
Yeah, I think every situation is different, but if I were to give some general advice, is try to remove the ego from it. And don't worry about the negotiation of it. Ask for help. As much as you feel like that puts you at a handicap. Well, you've asked me for help 5 times in the last 2 months or whatever. You know what? Try to be a human being. Even if you feel that the other side is not being that way, I think you can only win people over by acting in that way. And, you know, I'd call acting in a loving way in that sense. That's challenging for us too. At times, my ex-wife, she would need me to cover for a weekend or something like that. And rather than just coming out and saying, hey, could you do me a favor? Why? Because she probably didn't also want to feel like that she was going to owe me something down the road. Instead, you know, fair enough, she would say, oh, well, you know, in the last 6 months, there's been 3 times that I covered for you, so I was hoping you could cover for me this next Friday. And that's fine. That was fine. This was early on. It would have been better if she just said, hey, could you do me a favor and cover Friday? I would have been happy to.
Yeah.
And if you think about that, if you start asking each other for favors now, asking for help, and you start giving each other help, you're starting to build an important relationship. Because you have a relationship if you have children, no matter what you think, as long as you're going to have those kids. And so I would try to get to that point, despite the fact you may be asking for help in that way for 10 years and never get it back from the other side.
Wow.
And you have to, look, life is about the long game, and our kids especially about the long game. Having that perspective, I think, is important.
Did you pick that number out of a hat? 10 years?
Yeah, I was out of a hat.
It is, because I'd say, like, I've heard that number before from long time, you know, folks who have been divorced for a long time. It just seems, I think, are you joking? But I've heard, no, you'll be fine in 10 years.
Well, I picked 10 years because you can't put yourself in the idea that's short term.
Yeah.
In other words, it's far enough out on the horizon that you're not getting some psychic reward back.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen with children as well, that for whatever reason, they have, as children, we all have our own angst. And even if the divorce was probably a very positive thing for them, which is often the case, I'm sure they're going to point to it as being that's the reason they have this angst. Although the reason is they're a teenager and they have angst, right?
Right.
But they had to find a lightning rod, and that'll be it.
Yeah.
And why? Because people will say, "Oh my gosh, yes, it's because of divorce."
Right.
And so they'll validate this. They pull it out of the hat, but because they got a positive reaction, they'll say, "I'll use that again." Right, well, at least this is my 2-bit psychology in that case. It seems to me. But yeah, that long period of time, I've seen children really not connect with one of their parents. Could be angst. Could be that the other parent's kind of undercutting them too. That's a tough situation. But over time, in the long run, there's just more likely than not they're going to understand what occurred. It's going to come out. The truth will come out slowly. It's it's certainly sometimes more quickly than one would expect. And so that's back to patience and having that long perspective. Doesn't feel great during the 5 or 10 years, however long that is. Absolutely. But I think that's what we're left with.
Let me jump to just a fun little bit, because you're sitting in it. But we were talking a little before about how. Tell me how you spent your time right after getting divorced. A lot of guys do different things. They hunker down in misery. They go out. They party like crazy. I've seen the whole range. What was your time right coming out of it like?
Yeah. For me, certainly at some point I was looking forward to getting out and out partying, but certainly having a little bit of fun here and there. But I didn't have an urgent need to do that immediately. For me, it was more important that I just take a deep breath, so to speak. So, in fact, I moved out of an apartment. Right? Very common thing. And the first thing I did is actually I bought this chair 16 years ago. Yeah. And I sat in the chair. It's the only thing I did. I went out, I worked out, I actually had a job, right? I did other things. But instead of running around, I must hit every bar available, I sat in the chair and I read. And in certain ways, I kind of got in touch with a part of me that in 2 years of frantic marriage, I had, lost a bit. Again, not the fault of the marriage or the ex-wife, but I had let that slip in my own way. And I wanted to come back in on a very even keel. And so I sat in the chair. I had friends come over, have a glass of wine or a cocktail or something like that, and reconnect with them, with myself. And then, and then I think it was about 3 months into it. Not as if I really planned it. I didn't plan to not go out. I didn't plan to then, I hit a certain date and go. But that worked for me. To read, I missed reading at that time. To do those sorts of things, and then to sort of re-engage in all those other areas to some extent. That was kind of it. And, to develop certain things that I wanted to develop, because now I had a little bit of time to do that myself. So.
I'm interested in the part where you talked about spending time alone was great, but also you'd have friends over, just quiet night, chatting. What was a mix of just alone time and time with other people?
I think I'm probably 50-50 introvert, extrovert.
Yeah.
Who really knows? But for me, I think it was a blend like that. So Friday, Saturday night, I have some friends over, and some of them would use that as a point of departure to go out. Not as if I wouldn't go out to a bar or whatever with them. Lived pretty close to some bars and clubs and everything at the time. But I didn't really go hit that hard necessarily. So I would say kind of 50-50. On a Wednesday night, I would sit there saying, oh, look, it's a Wednesday night. I must go out to the bars. I need to meet women. I need to do this or that. No, I didn't feel a need to do that. I might if I wanted to. But, so I guess to answer your question in a very long way, I think it was about half and half.
Yeah, okay. All right, tell me, you're in a great relationship now, obviously. Yeah. And this has been, how long have you been?
Actually, 8 years.
8 years now. Tell me what it was like when that relationship first started. Had you had other long-term relationships before?
Yeah, I had. In a sense, I guess I'm more, to some extent, of a serial monogamist, and so the idea of, I'll just date around, have a portfolio, and see 5 or 6 women at a time is exhausting to me. The idea of it actually is wonderful, but the actuality of it is exhausting, and trying to remember, keep things straight. And frankly, if I ever got to the point where I was kind of seeing that many women at the same time, so to speak, keeping stuff straight is not great. I wasn't really connecting in any depth. So that was not really kind of my game to do that so much. But to meet someone, go out with them a few times and see is there anything there or not. If so, then date for a while. And there's some women I dated for a few years at a time, following coming out of divorce and prior to meeting Christine. So that's very much the case. Everybody has, I think, their different mode in that stage.
When you first, how long were you dating Christine before you thought, hey, this is maybe different than some of the other relationships?
Yeah, good question. So I would say there was probably, when I was not with somebody specifically, I might have 3 or 4 women I'd met. And it's not as if I was dating one on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, but I maybe it would be the third date for one, maybe it'd be a first date for another one out there, and just kind of very lightly getting to know them. And then the one you've been out with 3 times, kind of like, well, that's not really working out. Either she's saying that or I am. And maybe a new one you meet out is coming on board. So it's kind of this, you're seeing a few people. And then somewhere over maybe a 6-month period of time, I was very much not looking for a girlfriend, so to speak. In other words, I was not thinking, you know what, it's a stage where I really want to find a person to be with. I was continuing trying to learn about myself, get to know people, experience the world, if you will. But it just so happened that little by little, more and more, I kind of wanted to see her again rather than call somebody else that I had met. And you start to realize that your portfolio or group of people that you're kind of hanging out with starts to dwindle if you're not putting attention to that. You're putting attention over here. So very much sort of in this organic way over a 3 to 6 month period of time, if you will. Now Christine lived a distance away from me, and Chrissy would do the driving often to come into San Francisco, and so that distance maybe was positive for both of us because she had just come out of a relationship and really was not in a spot to jump into one right away. And that, I think, slowed down our timing so that it worked for both of us. If it had gone any faster, I think I would not have been ready for it, and same thing for her. So interestingly enough, I think timing and circumstance plays a lot to this. But to answer your question, it's probably over about a 6-month period of time that seemed to be, you know what, I really like to focus on her and see how we can make that relationship work for as long as it would work.
Yeah. And now you're at the point where you're getting married again.
Well, yes, that's we haven't figured out a date, but that's likely coming very soon. Yeah.
How do you think about that? Boy, it's so. For me, the process of getting divorced has been such a long haul, and I was married for a long time. It's hard to even contemplate getting married again. But for you, pretty straightforward. I mean, it's been a long time, or
it's different now. Often, when you're married the first time, the marriage is up on the front end of things. You meet someone, you fall in love, you get married, and then you have kids. And then you work on the relationship, hopefully, with the kids, right? Or, right. I mean, and carve it out of stone, if it, right? For us, it's different. Coming out of relationships, marriages, we had kids, and we were not looking for more kids. We had to have 2 great daughters. We merged our families together. We have worked on our relationship on a daily, weekly basis. Not avoiding issues, bringing them up, staying up at night if we had to. Maybe that's not the best idea, to talk through things, to carve out the communication. Now, if we could not do that, then okay, we would choose another path and go out and meet other people. But kind of carving that relationship out of stone, if you will, and then saying, okay, well, what's marriage at this point and what does that mean? It means something different. It's no longer this fairy tale, I get married, all these things happen. Those things in large part have happened. And now, getting married, if you ask us both why, there's no absolute need for either of us to get married. We already have a very highly committed relationship. And we demonstrate that. I mean, a commitment is only demonstrated by the will to work through issues and to improve your relationship. Now it's a romantic notion, and that's wonderful at that point. It doesn't have the weight of the world on it. The weight of the world still exists, but it's in the building of the relationship.
Wow, that is a really interesting way to think about it. That it can finally be romantic because it's not dragged down by all of the expectations that a young marriage gives you.
In a sense, it's separated from that, and I would say to others, and there's different paths, because I've seen people come out of a divorce, find someone, fall in love, and that feels so good, get married right again. And I haven't done that. I believe the most important thing is that you have a relationship that works and that you work very hard on that. We had actually planned to get married earlier, and that put a little stress in the relationship. So we backed off of that completely.
Interesting.
And decided that's not the first thing we want. We want to actually make sure we have a strong relationship first and build that. And when we took that off the calendar and focused on our relationship, it just continued to improve every year and has continued to do that. So that worked well for us.
is.
So now it can't get any better. You just have to get married.
Yeah, perhaps. I think it can always get better. You're always going to have challenges. There's always going to be stressors in a relationship. And the idea is not to believe that if you find the right person that you won't have those stressors. That's a myth. I think you have to find the right person as someone who's going to work through those stressors, through those challenges with you, and do it in a way that is loving. Maybe not 100% of the time, but when you fail, when you don't hit that benchmark of trying to act in a loving way to each other, come back, are apologetic, you're forgiving each other, all the various things you need to do, communicate better next time, you learn and you improve and you move on.
Let's talk about I know your great interest in life is food.
Yeah.
And I love the way you connect your relationship with food to being a man in a way that I haven't heard described before. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about, actually it's very relevant to sort of divorce and the separation process. For me, I came out of divorce and then was really getting back in touch with myself and how I wanted to develop. I like connecting with people, and I like getting together. I love great conversation. I even like sitting here and talking about stuff like this. And I remember back in college that, hey, you can get people to show up if you have, free beer and pizza. So I thought, well, I'll do the same thing and start out by getting guys together, essentially, and get together over food. Started cooking a little bit for that. Say, well, okay, we'll do some basic stuff. And along the way, perhaps just the idea of getting better at a trade or a skill, plus having people together, became interesting. And so that at first I maybe had some okay food. I thought, well, okay, next time I could do a little better. Maybe I'll find a better way to create some food for people. And it'll be more interesting from a food perspective. Great conversation, great friends, but let's improve the experience. So little by little, not because I like to cook, but because I love getting people together, I learned to cook for that purpose. A couple cookbooks and some effort. If you can read, use a couple tools, you can figure it out. It's basically the idea. I swear for about 5 years, I would get people together. One of the groups was just a bunch of guys, and it would be 8 to 12. You could sit around a big table that I got, and we called it red wine and red meat. Basically, I'd make the red meat, they'd bring the red wine. It was all good times. People to get time away from the other burdens in their life, or the other things they have in their life, such as wives, girlfriends, kids, whatever it might be, and reconnect as men, which I think also, and that was a little side issue here, but is something that we're lacking quite a bit. We used to do a lot of stuff like that. There's hunting trips, there's golfing, a lot of things that we get, time for men to hang out together. That seems to be disappearing a little bit, especially in urban centers, and so to create that experience was something I was doing. But for 5 years, cooking was a burden to it. It was a cost of doing business. I actually was stressed. I didn't really enjoy it so much, but I went through that so I could get people together. At some point, I suppose, maybe 5 years, I'm just a slow learner, but I gained a level of competence, or maybe just my concern for how it came out dropped at the same time my competence rose, where I was more relaxed about it. I knew that things would be okay. They'll come out all right. I won't screw up a $200 piece of meat or something I'm going to serve to 8 people. Right. And then it started to get fun. And then the conversation at the table got more fun for me too. I was spending all my time in the kitchen and just my friends connecting, which is a wonderful thing too. But I could engage more that way. All of a sudden then cooking kind of took off, and I realized that this is not just a way that we survive, feeding ourselves, but there's an intrinsic value in a skill. There's an intrinsic value in something you bring to the table. Whether you play guitar, can sing a song, can tell a funny joke, are a good conversationalist, or can cook. And in that way, you're enriching the experience, and hopefully the people you also have at the table are bringing these various things there too. So I thought, you know what? I have a terrible voice. I've at certain times tried to start playing guitar, but I can't build the calluses up, and I will probably attempt to do that sometime in the future. but I can do this, and I can bring this to friends, family members. And so, not getting a little too hokey, it is sort of that gift that I can bring to people. And so I want to have something that I can do that way. And so that's how that kind of developed quite a bit.
That's a great way of thinking about it. You would think that, okay, not everybody has musical talent, but everybody eats. Everyone should have this inherent ability to appreciate food and to really use their senses. And then when you're able to explore that and bring out into food you produce, that should be natural, right? But I tell you, as you were talking about that, I realized to myself, I don't think I understood food for many, many years. I didn't really appreciate what I was eating, even when I was eating good food. And part of it was a lot of my emotional life was closed off. Was it necessary to open up your mindset, open up your emotional life in order to also appreciate food, or can anyone start from?
That's a good question. I don't think you have to do that first. I haven't really thought about that connection, but as you mention it now, I'm sure that's a very strong connection. I think it both ways. I think sometimes engaging in the behavior helps you in that emotional way. And so I don't think you have to sit and wait, well, I'm not ready to do these things. I think perhaps that was also partly me. Maybe I was in a latent way sort of ready for it. But for me, doing the task, doing these things, after a while, a lot of this becomes meditative. And actually, frankly, rather than sit with my legs crossed and meditate, I actually rather do that in the kitchen because good food's at the end of the process.
Right.
And so that's what it is for me. At some point, even the simple task of chopping an onion, and I don't sit there and chop like you see on television, but I don't need to do that. But just going through these processes, music on in the background, gives me time that is very meditative, and it's sort of Zen in the book of Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, right? Some people have read. Actually, I've never read that, but I understand the underlying concept behind it. And I think it's very similar. Now, if you're a little geeky like me, then you'll take it to an nth degree, and so yes, I'll use a carbon steel knife, and I've got a whetstone that at certain times, again meditative, I will sharpen that myself. And learn how to do that. Very simple once you learn how to do it and have just a couple pieces of equipment. But to do that and the care for that knife or the care for a cast iron pan, which, yes, is less than if you get a stainless steel pan, covered pan that you don't have to do much to put in the dishwasher. But you're not going to get the same result in two ways. Probably not from the food. And then there's just an intrinsic result from taking care of a tool, something that you use that's core to your life. Not that you want too many of those, because that would take up too much time. Like, I no longer do that on a car. I don't do maintenance on my car anymore, but you got to pick your spots, whether it's your motorcycle or your knives or what it might be.
Right. It's great. It's a great way of thinking about it, that food is this sort of sneaky way into a different place in your mind, right?
Yeah.
Like if somebody tells me, "Oh, you're going through a tough time," try meditation, try yoga. Like, no, thanks. But this idea that you can really just sort of find that same mental zone through cooking, and hey, if you can't, at least you're going to eat some great food.
Well, and have friends over, right? I
Yeah.
mean, right? Have great food, feed yourself, and then have your buddies over. Because really, I think that's probably one of the best things. Have buddies and make more. You probably, it's a process. We get married, we stop calling our friends. We only do stuff with other married people. I mean, your world, shrinks. You have kids, shrinks further. This is an opportunity now to rebuild some things that you probably didn't want to and shouldn't have given up on. And I think the connection is going to be really helpful for a lot of people. It certainly was for me through that stage.
Okay. This is good. We got a lot of good material. Let's see if there are any other things. I'll try asking some set questions if I can come up with any. So, if you have a friend who you've known for a while, who's been married for a while, comes to you and says he's getting divorced, what's the first thing that you tell him? What's the thing that you want him to understand right up front?
I guess if there's anything that, it's not just going to be okay. Life's going to get a lot better than they think it is.
Yeah.
And it will do so in ways that they might suspect, but it'll do ways also that they don't expect.
Yeah. That, I find that to be so incredibly true, and I'm amazed at the distance between my knowledge of that truth now and my ability to accept it first coming into this really tough period. Because, man, everybody tells you, oh, it's going to be better, it's going to be great, it's going to be the best ever. And I think it's really hard to hear that. Like, if you've got a real skeptic around that message, how do you convince them? And maybe sometimes you can see that they're struggling. They're not going to let themselves experience that great future. How can you open the door for them?
I don't know if you can. I mean, what I think you can do, well, I think you can open doors for them, right? But will they go through those doors? So I think you can open a bunch of doors. And when they're ready at their time, they'll walk through some of those doors. So I think probably it's a matter of opening doors or pointing out doors that you've seen. And little by little, they make those decisions themselves to go through it. I don't think as a friend you can speed along the process. I have wanted to. I've had dear friends go through this process and been in very tough situations. But I think psychologically, they're on their own time frame, and we can influence on the edges. Maybe we speed it along a little bit. We'll never know. But I think you are there to support as much as you can and to show them these paths. And maybe this is what we're talking about doing here. If you show them enough of other stories, you might move them along a little more quickly. They might, hold on to a little more to the hope that's lighting in the tunnel. That yes, this is painful. There's things I feel, failure, fear, anger, whatever. But I think I can get through this at some point. But I don't think you can get them to give that up immediately. Yeah, it's tough.
So when you see a friend making mistakes or things that you might consider questionable judgments, what do you do? Do you try to prevent it? Do you try to say go into head first into it? Like what do you do? Or do you just?
I've always romanticized the idea of we do an intervention on a friend and say, let's grab them and fly out to Hawaii. And, you'd be fighting all the way there, so you have to drug them. And then I know how you get them on the plane, drugged. And anyway, with TSA, there's probably no way to actually make this happen. It's just a fairy tale. I don't know if that works anyway. I think they go to Hawaii, have a great time. I think they flip right back to where they are, whatever that might be, doing things that are clearly not in their best interest. So I think the question you're asking actually from a philosophical point of view is, what is your duty as a friend, as a human being, and as a friend for someone? And I think it's to speak the truth, and I think it's to do the things that people who are not friends will not do, and that is to confront. But, obviously you learn to do that in ways that are either extremely gentle, and if you're extremely gentle, maybe they're not getting the message, and try not to do it in such a confrontational way that you're just causing them more pain. You can do it Socratically and ask questions. Of course, Socrates was pretty much given choice of exile or suicide. So, it's not necessarily the greatest example, but I think asking questions, and generally speaking, you ask someone an obvious question, do you think the path you're taking is going to lead you to general happiness? They know the answer, right? They generally know what that answer is, even if they're telling you, oh yes, it totally will. They know they're lying to themselves. They're just not ready to be vulnerable and authentic around those issues at that point. But you're planting seeds even with those questions. So I think that's what you do. I think probably you try to avoid too much affirmation of the BS that they're telling themselves.
Yeah.
So don't get into that game too much. I think generally men don't play that game so much. I think that's good. Let's not fall into that category. So I think if you're empathizing, then you're not agreeing maybe with someone's activity. You may say, hey, I totally get the challenges you're facing, the pain you feel. I've been through this, or I've seen people go through it. I totally get that. But try not to affirm the actions that are probably not going to help them, and try to slightly move them another direction. Yeah. I think that's the best we can do.
Sometimes I see guys, making progress a little bit herky-jerky. they sort of make it a little bit, and they feel a little bit better, and they kind of stop their development. They kind of stop their personal growth. They're like, I'm in enough of a relationship now, and this is much better than my previous terrible marriage. Maybe I should just get married again. This is fine. And you just go, man, no, this isn't good.
Right. You didn't learn the full message
Yeah.
before. You really. Again, it's the same thing. Can you really get anybody to behave differently than they're behaving? I don't know. I think you can be there as a friend, to be a mirror back to them to some extent, to ask certain questions, ask them, what are the major needs that you have? I know you well, and I think I know some of them, but I'm guessing at them because I'm on the outside. So tell me what you think some of your major needs are. And are you getting those met with who you're with now? Enough of those. And we're going to hear our friends often say, oh yeah, I am. And you're like, no, you're getting like 10%. But you can't really throw it back in their face that easily. I mean, maybe you can. You can say, well, look, I know you have all these needs. I really only see this need being met, frankly. There's all these others. I believe you have. And I don't think you want to compromise those. I think you want those from a partner. If you're going to choose a partner long term, you want that someone's going to help you meet those needs, or at least be on the same side of the table as you in trying to meet those needs. And I think that sort of conversation can be helpful. Have I seen anybody come out of that conversation like, you're right, I'm getting rid of her, I'm going to somebody else? No. Or they say that and then they're still with her a week later, right? So
I'll tell you from personal experience, the conversation is good. It sticks in the back of your head, and you still do all the things you're going to do. And then, but after a while, you kind of remember, I'm like, oh, okay, that was good advice.
The wisdom of 1,000, 2,000 years ago is wisdom because it doesn't change too much. Right. When the student is ready, the teacher appears, or whatever. We are on our own paths, time-wise. And I have certainly come to a point myself in terms of commenting on family members and friends in terms of them when they're in a bad relationship and getting divorced. I used to be in the position, hey, it is not there. There's, you're just wasting time and hurting yourself the longer you stay in. To more of a position that, the relationship is not going to last. It's basically not meeting your needs. But in terms of timeline, I have no comment on that because that is completely up to you. You can take 6 months and decide that's enough time for you to get to the point where you're ready, or you can take 6 years, and there would be no difference. The relationship's not going to work after, when it's this obvious, but it's just a matter of how much time do you want to stick in there rather than get on the next stage of your life, which may sound like, oh my God, of course I want to get out in the next stage of my life, but that's just not how it works. Yeah. We have internal governors to the speed with which we will do things. And I don't know if we can even change that too much inside of ourselves. I don't know if we can accelerate that, even if mentally we have the logical reasons to do so.
Yeah, no, I know that you can't. Understanding is not even half the battle.
Yeah. And it sucks when you see a good friend with a shadow over their head. I've seen you at times where, for a weekend or whatever, it should have been really fun. You're just not happy the whole time. That's it. We're going to have to go through those times. And that could be not just a weekend, it could be a decade. You hope it's a weekend, not a decade. Yeah. But that's all the work we do individually inside of ourselves.